This panel are all very well versed in marrying data and marketing. And let's jump right in and hear the CEO point of view in seeing how data-driven marketing can drive growth and consumer engagement and, of course, shape the future. Let's just welcome our panel. We have the CEO and President Director of the Unilever Indonesia, Tbk, and also the Chairman of the Board of MMA Indonesia, Mr. HEMANT BAKSHI. The Chairman and CEO, India and Southeast Asia, Havas Media, Mr. VISHNU MOHAN. The Managing Director of EMTEK and CEO SCTV, Bapak SUTANTO HARTONO. And of course, Chief Data Officer of GOJEK, who is also our moderator for this afternoon, Mr. GAUTAM KOTWAL. Can we have a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for your panel and for your moderator.
Good afternoon. Well, so topic for today is data-driven marketing. I want to welcome our esteemed panelists here, HEMANT, VISHNU, and Tanto. Today we'll talk about what is data-driven marketing, what are the challenges behind it, what kind of data strategy do you guys need to implement it, and what kind of org structures, people that you need to make it a success. So I'm trying to, okay, the slides are not working, so I'll continue.
Yeah, it's okay, man, I think. It's on the screen.
Sorry. So what is the power of data-driven marketing? Here's a great example. A leader who was an outsider, a reality star, is now the most powerful man in the world. Imagine that as to what marketing can do. What is a definition? There are several definitions in Google, Wikipedia. The one that I liked was use of structured data and unstructured data about your customers so that you can derive insights and make effective decisions from it. What are the challenges and complexities you face doing so? This chart is pretty involved, but that just shows what are the challenges and complexities in it. What kind of platform do you need to process this data? How do you derive consumer insights? And what kind of people and organization do you need? That's the kind of the complexities you face. If you look at companies like Facebook and Amazon, one thing that they did really well was they owned their customer data and just look at their valuation. They're one of the most successful companies in the world. So one guiding principle is own your customer data. As I said, what kind of strategy and platform do you need? One is to collect the data, to analyze it, to segment it, to activate it, and then you want to optimize it so that you can make that data work for you. Generating insights from data is really, really hard, right? And I'll be talking to the panel about it as to what they've done about it. So at this moment, I'm going to start with Tanto. And Tanto, we talked about being data-driven marketing and the complexities and the challenges behind it. How have you overcome it?
Well, the simple answer is that we have not overcome it. I think that is the biggest challenge that we have, right? So clearly we're trying to do our best, starting with the basic, where for sure number one, we need the right tools to do that. So a good example is within EMTEK ecosystem, within the digital side, for instance, we do have publishing under KLY. We have video content under video.com, and we have Bukalapak, for instance. So clearly this is at 3 different verticals with a lot of data. But in the past, we kept it as different islands. So we missed the most important element in terms of a broader roadmap as to the same viewers uh, consuming certain articles to certain content video and then to do a transaction. So one simple example to do that is obviously to invest in a certain tool, the common DMP. So we are implementing that. So now we have much better capability to know the cross journey across the users. So that's one big step. But of course, the other challenges, as you point out, also how we beef up our organization. Because clearly the other challenge is also the fact that most of our marketers are not data savvy. So clearly this is like we are doing experimenting in terms of how we can fix our organization, whether we create like a task force that is combining the product team with the marketing team. So that way they're in the same boat and then force the couples in a way to be much more data oriented.
And Vishnu, how are you doing about it?
I think as an organization, we sit somewhere in between, right? Because the consumer is at one end, the marketers are there, and the agency is in between. And our job is essentially to facilitate some of the decisions that the marketers need to take with the data. Our biggest challenge, because our job is to be able to ensure that we provide the right recommendation, is always been in the area of talent, right? And because it's very hard, two things become very, very hard. One is the right kind of talent, and the other very important, I think, which most people tend to forget, is the ability of the talent to make it simple. I mean, we've seen time and again, you put 5 data scientists on this table, I can tell you the amount of jargon that they will throw this thing will be like, what the hell have they spoken, you know? So I think those two elements are extremely important, and that is where we've tried to kind of put together to enable. The other part of the bucket has always been the investments around it, as you rightly pointed out, the structured and the unstructured data, all of that getting together. How many of these marketers are truly at a stage where they are prepared to be able to get to a level of data investment in order to make those decisions? Okay, so also the fact remains that many of what we tend to talk about still remains, even when you start to look at examples around the world of what has worked for data-driven marketing and some of the great examples, you'll tend to see it largely around either these the large companies who have been able to make some important decisions and that has changed revenue. But I would like to end with the last thing, which is, if you look at data-driven marketing from a very helicopter angle, right? All of this is fundamentally about behavioral change, right? So even if you just look at from the perspective of future, you can imagine the entire world being a data engine for governments. Because when you start to look at the 17 sustainable goals that exist, each of these goals are basically going to demand a consumer behavior change, that will action. And the only thing that will be able to do it is to be able to use data to point towards stuff that can instigate behavior. I think those are the areas that I would say are some of the stuff that our investments, our studies, our researchers, etc., are all focused on.
And Hemant, how are you overcoming the challenges around data-driven marketing?
Yeah, so when I think about data-driven marketing, I personally think that the phrase itself is incorrect. And I feel when we talk about data-driven marketing, it almost seems like the techies and the nerds have taken over. Because I would actually call it marketing enabled or driven by or powered by data. And I very often feel that we put data at the center of it and forget that our job finally is to build brands and build a business. And therefore, in doing data-driven marketing, we must not lose sight of the fact that finally we want to land the relevant, most persuasive content to a certain target consumer at the right time. And I think it's a huge opportunity for us to be extremely creative and not get lost in the various terminologies and data systems, etc., etc. So I personally feel that it's really the most fabulous time for a young person to be a brand manager or a marketing person. And you can create marketing and advertising, which was never possible when I was young and I was a brand manager. And I can give you numerous examples of how that can be done. And I can talk about many Unilever brands, but the intention today is not to talk about Unilever, but to talk about the industry. Couple of days back, I was talking to my very good friend Dharnesh, who runs the Nestle business in Indonesia, and I was saying, if you take Kit Kat as a brand has a fabulous, advertising idea of take a break. And in the past, you could do one ad on television, which would have the same message, and everyone would see the, same ad, and it would have a certain impact. But today, if you think about it, through data, I can identify that there is separate content I want to serve to children, school kids who are getting a break in school, to, let's say, someone stuck in traffic, in the midst of Jakarta traffic, and that person wants to take a break. And to these two consumers, I can serve totally different ads. For the young kid, it's about, you have limited money, you want to have a snack, Kit Kat's a great option, take a break, and you could do something very different for the person who's, stuck in traffic. So I truly believe this is a great opportunity for us to do brilliant marketing, and data enables it. And we should all, make sure that we give the young brand managers, the young people in advertising agencies, an opportunity to do the best work they can because it's enabled by data, and make sure they don't get lost in this entire tech stuff which we all keep talking about. So I think the big opportunity for us is to do really great marketing.
Yeah, well said, Hemant. I completely agree with you guys. Like, I'm a CDO, so I love techie stuff, and I know I work with a lot of data scientists who speak a lot of jargon. So Hemant, to your point, you talked about that this is a great time to be a brand marketer. So you've gathered all this data, right? But to generate insights from this plethora of data that we've collected, and using those insights to drive relevant marketing, as you call it, what advice would you give to the audience around how to do it?
Yeah, so my own view on this one is that while a lot of things change, certain inherent truths about marketing don't change. And our job as good marketers is to really understand our consumers, understand their needs, and then give them messages which will help them meet those needs. And you started by showing an example of the president of the US. And I know, given his approval ratings, half the room must love him and half the room may not. But the fact is, if you think about what they did through, all the infamous Cambridge Analytica work, was not go with the same message to everyone, not even go to everyone, but actually identify the key people who mattered, and then give them a message which would lead to a behavior change. And I think, again, for all of us, we must keep that in mind, that we can use the data, and the data helps us to be much sharper in our targeting. But finally, we then have to look at our consumer, understand the insights, understand the barriers, and overcome them. So I feel that while a lot changes, the inherent truth of marketing doesn't change. And we must focus our people to keep doing that better than they ever did before. So that would be my response to it.
Thank you. Vishnu?
I think, all of which Hemant is saying is absolutely correct. But I think it's also the reality of the fact is we got to move of thinking of data-driven beyond just campaigns and content serving to really making some significant changes that are driven by the insights that are coming out of that, which are making really business goals, okay? I give you a very simple example. This is Universal Music, which is part of the group. Shawn Mendes, one of the album I remember, and we were at a conference. And you know how in playlists they put the sequence of the songs. And the data they just analyzed the data of the listening of so far that. And all they did for the future ones, that they changed the playlist sequence. They had a 700,000 euros incremental uplift. Now that is not unheard of. You wouldn't think about it in the past, even thinking that maybe I should have done that in the first place. This is, so my point being that I think we are at a stage where it is beyond, because yes, a lot of the data-driven stuff is largely in the realm of talking about different kinds of content serving or different kinds of ad serving, and therefore influencing the behaviors by getting much more focused. I think there's much more to it today than just that.
Tanto, would love to hear your thoughts.
I agree with what Pak Herman mentioned earlier, right? So despite the jargon, actually when you talk about the data analytics, it's something that we have done for ages actually. So let me give you a different perspective, let's say. Let's not talk about marketing. Let's talk at our overview as the head of the company, for instance. So every time I'm doing a business review. So my most important question to my team would be, help me to understand what's going on with your business. So we start with whether that's product profitability analysis, whether you talk about like segment consumer analysis, or you're talking about like a business profitability analysis. So let's start with the data. And back in the days when the big data is not available, we are able to look at it and then come up with the right conclusion. So fast forward, I think what difference now is the fact that we have much bigger data in front of us. So therefore, we are able to come up with much more sophisticated analyticals. But the conclusion should be the same as if what needs to be done with the data. So my advice would be play around with it, do a trial and error with it, because like some examples that in our group, let's say Bukalapak. So on one hand, we are looking at the data based on which marketing channels that actually work. And then we are looking at it based on the lifetime value conversion, not just on one event. So that way, enable us to come up with the better conclusion as to what would be the most effective marketing channels. Or the other thing is about the product. So in the past, we used to come up with like, say, a cashback or discount on any products, you know. But we learned that the conversion from one product to another is completely different. And one product behaves differently from one customer to another. So again, with better data, with more data that we collect, we are able to capture the conversion much more effectively also. But if you go back to my earlier example, the fundamental of the storytelling, I think should remain the same.
Great points, guys. Completely agree. Like at the end of the day, it's all about storytelling. And it's all about having the right org structure, the right people in your organization that can tell those stories. So Tanto, what can you tell the audience around if they want to become great marketeers, how should they think about doing that? And how are you planning of organizing your company to be more effective in doing so?
So that's an idea that, as I mentioned also earlier, we are learning as we're doing, right? So I don't think that we derive the right conclusion at this point. But a good example, one of my subsidiary, video.com. So we noticed that actually across different divisions within the same company, we have data analysts. One sitting on the engineering side, one sitting on the product side, one sitting on the marketing side, one sitting on another division. So that raised actually a question that we discussed recently. Does it make sense to split all of those data analytics across different divisions? Or should we combine it into one unit together? And then that way they can share the data much more cohesively. So that's an area that we are actually learning. And then as I mentioned also earlier, how we mix people who may not be very data-driven orientation, let's say the marketers, combined with the product that tend to be much more marketing-driven. But the product guy need also to understand where everything is coming from. What will be the ultimate goal that marketers try to derive, so that way they can complement each other.
Vishnu, what's your perspective?
I think one of the learnings that I would say from my perspective is that who owns it within the organization. And I think this has been this, and I think some of the mistakes that others have made, and including us, is to try and put the data people within the product streams, and treat it like just like a product. And I think that's where it tends to not get the kind of importance or advantage that it needs to be. So one of the fundamental changes that have happened is it has become CEO's direct responsibility. Okay, so the chief data officer of the company directly reports to the CEO, and therefore it's a mandate. And that difference, we can find it as being able to make change, the necessary change to driving the organization to becoming much more data-centric.
Yeah.
Hemant.
Yeah, so this reminds me of a boss I had many years ago. Some of the people in this room might even know him. And he used to say, in God we trust, everyone else must bring data. And I think in more and more, in some ways, that's the reality, right? So today in the world we exist in, the option of someone saying, I don't know data or I won't get into it is not there. So you might be the most creative marketer or an agency person wherever, but data is critical. So I think all of us now need to be data savvy. Having said that, I think, the point I was making earlier, we must make sure that there are certain experts who really can do all the technology and all the really sophisticated work on data, and that then enables a much larger number of people to do, the stuff they're good at, creativity and so on. So one of the things we are doing in our organization is creating everywhere in all countries something we call as a digital hub. And that is a part of the organization which enables rest of the organization to leverage data much better. So my own view is that in today's day, everyone has to be data intelligent. And that option of not being data intelligent doesn't exist. But then we must also create a part of the organization, which I think everyone's doing, which becomes significantly more expert on managing data and enabling rest of the organization to do a better job.
I think the point that just to add to it is the difference between technologists and strategists. We need to have a vision and a strategy of the people, and of course you have the technologists who decide what kind of investments we need to make, the DMP that we need to create, whatever the systems that we need to put in, as different from the people who can actually bring together the strategy and rally the organization.
Yeah, so true. So we're going to open it up for questions to the audience. But I'd like to, before I open it up, I have one more question for this expert panelist over here. Tanto, if you can summarize and synthesize some key insights that you would want to give to this audience, that they can walk away, what would you tell them? Around how to become a great marketer, how to use data effectively. We've had a very engrossing discussion. I'd like to sort of synthesize and summarize for the audience as to what are the key messages they can take away from this group.
I think the most important thing is keep hungry, okay? Because like sometimes they tend to be like concluding the conclusion too soon. And well, again, this is the day where the behavior is not entirely established. And if I look at the journey of some of the startups especially, right? What you thought is happening to certain behavior apparently will change substantially later on. So this is where we need to keep on asking ourselves whether basically the conclusion or the assumption still valid 3 months down the road or 6 months down the road. So that is essential, and plus the ecosystem keep on changing. So let's say all of a sudden e-commerce used to be like this, and with the presence of now e-wallet, how much has that changed? And then you need to go back again with your assumption whether the same conclusion is actually still the same or not.
Makes sense. Vishnu, what about you?
I would think that probably the one piece of advice would be that don't think too big, okay? Don't get scared by it, I mean, because sometimes we tend to start to think about it's almost like we get overawed by the concept of like, here is a massive data, investment that we need to make before we need to get it to start into it. I mean, look at the very simple example of what Hemant just narrated with KitKat. Those are basic, simple examples that still have used marketing enabled by data to actually make some great marketing successes. Because the more you are able to demonstrate with this simple stuff, the more you will be able to get the organization's interest in actually uplifting that capability inside the organization and then make the bigger investment.
Hemant?
Yeah. So, very often people come here and sit on this stage and give advice to young people. And my own view is that if I would rather give advice to people like myself and to my peers about what is our role in this changing world. And the advice I give to myself every time is that my job is to simplify. Because what's happening today is with so many messages, so much technology, I sometimes feel that we overwhelm people. And our role as leaders is to simplify what needs to be done. And for me, it is not such a complex thing. We now have data. We never had data before. We can do some degree of customization, right? So there are many brands which we sell both to men and to women, right? If nothing else, at least create a segment of two. Yeah, we can identify women, we can identify men through data. At least let's serve content which is different. So I'm saying we can get better over a period of time, but let's start small, be simple, and start doing better work than what we were doing earlier. So my advice to my peer set and to myself would be our job is to simplify.
Thank you. So do you guys have any questions in the audience? So what I heard from the panelists is, one is change is constant. Second is be hungry. right? Don't think too big. Think what you can execute fairly soon and make it simple. Keep it simple because that will enable you to execute. Anybody in the audience would like to ask questions to this panelist that you would want to learn from this very esteemed group? I'm sure somebody has a question. If not, this gentleman in the back. I'm talking to you. Go ahead, please ask a question.
This is not a set of HEMANT. You're speaking about that and the advice that all of you have given to all of. What about the infrastructure that is required and different parts of the ecosystem? What steps they need to do to ensure that infrastructures are ready to enable those devices?
I'm going to take that question. This is sort of my area of expertise. So, a couple of things have changed that enable us to become data intelligent, as the panelists said. One is the advent of cloud. We can now acquire and collect massive amounts of data and process it very quickly. The second thing we need to do is, as the panelists said, that we've got to simplify it for the marketeers to make use of it. So we've got to have the tools that enable them to become self-sufficient, right? You don't want to talk to an engineer every time to make decisions from data. And secondly is, I agree with Hemant and this whole group, which is keep it simple, right? The insights that you get from this data need to be actionable so that you can run campaigns, you can show the right content to the right customer at the right time. So I think that's my answer to the question.
So this whole question about first party data, we have a brand marketer sitting there, a publisher and an agency. Who should really own it? Brands ask for it, publishers don't want to give it, agency is trading on behalf of both of them on a daily basis. How should it be managed, and do brands really need to own the data? Is that their core business?
Hemant, I'm going to ask you to answer that question, but my answer is this. As a chief data officer, what I would advise to my CEO and the board is you've got to own your own customer data. But Hemant, why don't you answer that question?
Yeah, my simple answer to that is that in the future, value will transfer to who owns the data. The closer you are to the consumer and the more data you own, you will be more valuable. So it doesn't matter finally who makes the decision, whether we want a partner to own it, etc. But in the long run, if as a brand marketer you don't own your consumers' data, you will lose value.
Well, I haven't met a single brand marketer who says, I don't want to own the data. Not yet. So the answer is already there.
Tanto, what's your perspective on that question?
Well, of course, we like to keep the data. As Paiman said, right, who owns the data will be more valuable. So.
A related question on this one, more an observation actually. So in a world where Amazon and Alibaba already own all the customer data, what is left to own? There are other bits of information about the consumer which sit in various other silos around the world, right? So publishers own some, so different aspects of behavior. But there's huge unwillingness to put all that together for anyone's benefit. Everyone is basically jockeying for advantage with their data set. That I think is a huge challenge, isn't it? It's for the brands because Amazon and Alibaba own all the customer data already. It's for all the other constituents because everyone has a little piece of the picture, but not the full picture, and there isn't a model or a willingness for everyone to come together to experiment by putting all the data sets together to everyone's mutual benefit.
I completely agree. There are several challenges. The first challenge is regulation, right? With GDPR and data privacy, there is significant amount of governance that has to be put in to protect our customers. And then secondly, I would love to ask these panelists, because they run a billion-dollar business, which is how do we create an environment where companies can share data while benefiting the customer. Because as you all have said in the past, it's all about the customer. So Tanto, how are you thinking about building an infrastructure and data sharing that enables us to solve that problem?
Well, illustration that I gave you earlier is that how we combine our DMP, because that's a real step, how we break the verticals across different digital assets. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the more that you understand the journey of a certain individual across different verticals, from e-commerce, from payment, from publishing, right? So then you are able to predict the behavior, and therefore you can able to provide either recommendation or product promotion or cashback in much more accurate way.
Vishnu?
I would just say an example of a bank client that we do, okay, which shares 100% the data and transparency. But part of the reason as to why they were comfortable in doing this is the engagement model that they have with the agency. So we are with this client on a 100% cost per acquisition model. We are not paid on media investments, we are not paid on any of this thing, we are paid only if a unit moves, actually. And if we are responsible for our own future by being responsible for the company's future, then that created the symbiosis that we needed, the trust that we needed to be able to do. But we're not able to kind of get more and more examples or more and more this thing. We have a few, but that I guess is my point, that the level of trust is dependent on how much ownability that you are prepared to take.
Yeah. Firstly, I think all the questions are being asked by the experts, so that's a bit of a challenge here. But let me still try and answer. So the question was that if Ali and Amazon and everyone already has all the data, what are you going to collect? And I think it's a very fair question. But firstly, the question you must ask anyone who wants to collect data is, what will you do with this data? Because sometimes we just become greedy about things and say, oh, I want data, but when we have data, we do nothing with it. So I think what's more important is to understand, what will you do with the data? What's your marketing problem you want to solve, and how will data help? And to give you an example, in our foods business, that if I had data of consumers who had allergies on certain things, or who were vegetarian or non-vegetarian, that is a significantly more valuable piece of information than just knowing their age or some other profile. And therefore, if I know what data I want, I can then target consumers and get that data. And that data is more valuable than anything else which Amazon or one of the tech players might have. So I think what's more important is to know what you will do with the data and then seek that data. And that may or may not be available with other people. But if I have first-party data of that nature, I can do significantly better targeted work, which will lead to higher conversion.
Okay, so no more questions from the experts in that corner. I'm going to look towards the left here. Folks who are on their phones,
maybe it's not really a question, but rather a comment. Reportedly, Amazon is working on a concept of a clean room, where a brand or an advertiser can bring in first-party data and then operate in a clean room environment using Amazon third-party data. And then after the project is done, it's all cleaned up, and the integrity of the data is not compromised. Yeah. So this could be a solution potentially for us here. And yeah, I would like to hear your opinion. Do you see that working in the current realm of considering regulatory and technical limitations? Thank you.
great question. Tanto, as you said earlier, you want to own the data so that you can monetize it. How would you answer that question that was just asked right now?
I think I'd like to hear your answer first.
Okay. Absolutely. So we at GOJEK, one of the advantages we have is we have a lot of behavioral data and transactional data. And we are working with a lot of brand partners and companies to figure out how do we monetize it. But the question is so valid, which is we have to do it legally. We have to protect our consumers. So we have a whole dedicated infrastructure where we are creating a data infrastructure, sharing infrastructure, we have a whole team that is working with the government to make sure that we follow the right policies. So kind of that clean room environment that Amazon has talked about, that's what we are doing. We are also building APIs and tools so that we can share that data with our brands and publishers. Because at the end of the day, we believe that by doing so, we will solve consumer problems and also help our mutual businesses.
I think we're out of time.
So thank you guys. I want to just thank all of you for coming here and answering my questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, please once again give it up for our panel. Mr. HEMANT BAKSHI, Mr. VISHNU MOHAN, Mr. SUTANTO HARTONO, and of course our moderator, Mr. GAUTAM KOTWAL. Thank you very much, gentlemen.